Hello everyone and welcome to some spooky book recommendations. I love doing this video every year because every year I add on to my list because I try to read more spooky books obviously every single year. So what these books are they're spooky books that are perfect to read in October. There will not be any mystery thrillers in this book of Leno genre because I am doing a separate video for that very soon, so stay tuned for that. But a lot of these are YA, maybe just kind of the horror genre. There is a few that are YA thrillers. These are just books that I think that are perfect to read for Halloween. So let's get into it because I actually have a ton to talk about. First up is a very recent read for me. I read last month and I just really adored it, and I was like, as soon as I finished it, I was like, this is the perfect book to read in October. And that is Hoard by Katrina Leno. So this is YA horror, I guess you could say. I'm not sure of the genre. Either way, it's perfect to read for Halloween. So this whole book, we follow a character named Jane, whose father passes away. She has to move across the country pretty much with her mom to Maine, and they have to move into her old grandparents' house that passed away in this really kind of old, dilapidated mansion. And when she moves there, she notices a lot of different things. The house is kind of weird. She's noticing different smells, like the scent of roses all the time, which is very odd. A lot of people are treating her strangely and talking about her family like just very odd. So this whole book kind of has a shroud of mystery with it, and honestly, it's just weird. And it got kind of scary to read at times because Katrina Leno just writes really kind of spooky, and you feel like the house is haunted and things are just going weird and you just don't know what to expect. So I really enjoyed this one. I mean, if the cover doesn't tell you it's perfect to read for Halloween, hopefully I sold you on it because, like I said, this is perfect. It's eerie, creepy, and just weird. Next up is one I recommend every single year, and that is The Wicked Deep by Erin. So it's been a few years since I've read that, honestly, and it's still one of my favorite books that I recommend during the Halloween months because it's just spooky and I just really enjoy it, and the writing is also amazing. So basically what happens in this book, we have these witches that are sisters, and you know, it's back in the time, so everyone like knew they were witches. They tied stones to their feet, threw them in the ocean, they were killed. So now many years later, this town is really celebrated for that because every summer, like, this town has this festival for these dead sisters. And what they don't know is every summer these three sisters come back and they inhabit the body of a girl that is living in the town, and they lure boys to the water to kill them, pretty much, to drown. So we have like a lot of history with this town, a lot of history of these witches, and it's just really creepy and eerie, and I love the writing. I don't know where my copy of this has gone for the life of me. Needless to say, I love the cover, I love the writing, and I just love the way she wrote this town, just very eerie. I felt like it was there. I could picture it all very perfectly. And again, this is a perfect book, and a witchy book at that, to read for Halloween. Another one of my favorites is Saw Kill Girls by Claire Legrand. I went into this book and reading it with not a lot of expectations, but I came out loving it. This is another odd type of weird book, which I usually don't read a ton of, but this one we have this island, or a place called Sawkill Rock, and a lot of deaths have happened there, particularly with girls. Girls go missing and they don't know what has happened to them exactly. So we follow three characters in this book. We follow Marion, who is the new girl. Then we follow Zoe, who I think is the sheriff's daughter. And then we follow Val, who's kind of like the queen bee who rules everybody, but she knows what's really going on. So basically, you learn in this book where these girls that have been disappearing for decades go, and it's very dark and very creepy. Like, I was legitimately scared while reading this book, but I don't think this is a book for everyone because it's kind of an odd one, but I really loved it, and I loved for the fact that a lot of these books I'm talking about today, including this one, are standalones. I love a good, like, YA spooky standalone, honestly. Like, give me the story, one and done. I am obsessed with it, much like this one. An adult fantasy book I'm going to talk about is The Year of the Witching by Alexis Henderson. This is a very kind of ominous book about a cult, pretty much, and about a religious cult. So we follow a character. Please forgive me, I read this on ebook, so I don't know her name. And she is born into this religious cult where they have the prophet, the father, and it changes every, time they die. And he has many wives with many children, and their rules are very deep in this kind of cultish religious thing. And this girl's noticing a lot of weird things about this. There's also the woods, because I feel like every spooky book's got some woods in it, which I'm always drawn to, at least reading about them, not going in them. And the woods are like really off limits because the witches live there and you can't go in there. And so this girl learns about her mother's history, about how she was involved with the witches, and figures out more about it. And it just kind of goes from there. It's perfect to read for Halloween. Again, the cover, but it's just the woods gives it a definite eerie quality with the witches especially, and it's a very kind of dark read, especially because you have witches and woods and cults, so it's got all the things, and it was just a really great book, and again, a standalone, which I adore. Speaking of fantasy, I'm going to go to YA fantasy now, and that is The Bone Houses by Emily Lloyd Jones. I just recently read this and really enjoyed it. So this is a YA fantasy about zombies pretty much, or in this book they call them the bone houses. Point of view of a grave digger's daughter. So her father passes away, her mother passes away, so she's kind of inherited the grave digging business, and her father has told her all about these bone houses. You know, when you bury the dead, sometimes the dead don't stay buried, you know, they come from the woods sometimes. Again, here a trigger word right there, woods. And she has to kill them again, and lately she's been noticing a resurgence of them, a whole bunch of them, so she decides to go off to figure out to finally end these bone houses once and for all, and she goes with a guy, and it's got some romance in it towards the tail end, but I really enjoyed it. It was a quick, fast read about bone houses, zombies, and about like prophecies and kind of spells and like forbidden stories, and it was just a really fun read, honestly. It wasn't very scary at all, but I loved reading about the family aspect, the bone houses, and how this whole world came to be, especially how they revere the dead and things like that. So I really enjoyed this one. I don't hear a lot of people talk about it, but I think it's a perfect book for, you guessed it, Halloween. Just like Strange Grace by Tessa Groton. This book, again, if you don't notice, features a lot of the woods. So this book is very weird because long ago, this village made a bargain with the devil to ensure their prosperity. When the slaughter moon rises, the village must sacrifice a young man to the depths of the devil's forest. So every year they send in their best person, and what happens in this book is we kind of have a love triangle going on. We have Rune and we have Arthur. Rune is the expectant saint that's going to go in the woods, and then we have Arthur, who is a reckless outcast. Then we have Marwyn that's kind of weaving them all together, and it's almost got a polygamy aspect into it, which is very interesting, but the woods are the main factor. Like, this one was also very creepy because whenever a slaughter moon comes, you have to sacrifice your best person, and it gets really creepy. Like, you have to survive the night, and like no person that's ever been in the woods during the slaughter moon has ever, lasted really. So it's very interesting. Again, a standalone, again, super creepy and perfect for this month. I won't say it again. Next up, another adult read, and that is Vicious by V.E. Schwab. So this is, I don't even know what to categorize this as. It's an adult book, but is it a fantasy? Is it horror? I don't know. Sometimes genres can get really nerve-bending. So this book, I'm sure you've heard about it. It's been on BookTube for a while, but I think it's great to read for Halloween, honestly, because we follow Victor and Eli, and both of them learn in college that maybe they can develop superpowers if they die, but can resuscitate themselves. So they do these experiments where like they die and have the other person like bring them back to life, and with that they develop powers. And so basically we follow two different time periods, one when they're in college discovering this whole trial and doing it themselves, and then years later when Victor is in prison and is about to get out because he is on his way to go kill Victor, his best friend, and you're like, what happened? They're BFFs, but then you get the time going back when they got the powers in college, so you have to figure it all out. And it's just a really dark book. It's got a question of heroes and villains. Sometimes with heroes and villains, it's not a good versus evil, but there's like kind of a morally gray line, and this one really goes into that. This does have a sequel called Vengeful, which honestly I didn't love, but I loved Vicious. Dark, ominous, spooky, all the things you want for Halloween read and more. So the last three I want to recommend are some of my favorite YA thrillers. I don't love a lot of them. I don't know why. I guess I'm just very picky on them. Why? I'm not sure, but I have read some in the past couple years that I just really love and would recommend. First one is A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson, I believe. I read this earlier this year and I was lent it, so I don't have a copy of it, but we follow a character, I forget her name, that kind of does a project for her senior in school about this murder that happened years ago in her town where a girl goes missing and they assume that her boyfriend killed her, so he's in jail, but his brother has always pleaded his innocence, so she decides to kind of reopen this case. And so she does it as a project, literally. The whole book is filled with like maps and different interviews she does because she is trying to prove that this boy is really innocent and not really actually a killer. And I really loved it. It was like a teenage mystery thriller where she's trying to figure it out, but I found it very realistic as well, like the things that she was doing and how she went about it. And I really enjoyed it. I believe there's a sequel coming out next year called Bad Blood. I don't know, but either way, I'm definitely going to read it because I enjoyed it a ton. Next is one that a lot of people love, including myself, and that is Sadie by Courtney Summers. So Sadie is a podcast kind of book, and podcasts and thrillers go hand in hand in my opinion. Usually if I hear that a thriller book has a podcast element into it, I don't need to know anything else about it. I will read it because they just work so perfectly together. I think a lot of that could be attested to a lot of true crime podcasts. I was really into Serial, things like that. So in this book we follow a character named Sadie, and Sadie is on the run. She's gone missing, and her sister was murdered, murdered a year before. And the whole book takes place in two perspectives. So we follow Sadie as she's going on this hunt to find her sister's killer because she knows who did it. And then we follow this guy who's kind of 3 steps behind her, where he's trying to find Sadie. He's trying to uncover, you know, where she is and also what's happened with her sister and things like that. And it's got just great, I highly recommend the audiobook because you get an actual podcast with it and you get actually Sadie's point of view, and both of them are equally amazing and haunting and very, very chilling. The last book I want to recommend, I don't know if this is a mystery thriller or just a plain old like horror fantasy. I'm not sure, but that's Rules for Vanishing by Kate Alice Marshall. This was also a really weird book. I really liked this one, and then the end came and I was very underwhelmed by it, but overall I enjoyed it because I was just questioning it the entire time I was reading it, which sometimes I like, sometimes I don't like. With this book, I liked it. So this is weird. It's about this girl named Sarah who has to save her sister, and she has to follow the road into, oh my goodness, you guessed it, the woods. A lot of these books have woods in them. Do we sense a theme? Woods are creepy. Stay away from them. So this road in the woods only appears once a year because there's this tale that if you follow it, you can reach Lucy Gallows, who's like this girl that disappeared decades ago. And so when you're on this road, you have to follow its rules and regulations and games. So she goes in there with like a lot of other people. Some weird junk happens, like stuff that you're just like, what? It's freaking bananas, but it's a good read. You are questioning it constantly. You're just like, what am I reading constantly? But I enjoyed it. Very dark, very creepy, and I liked it a ton. And it took me forever to realize there was a girl outlining this book because it just took me that long. But either way, it was creepy. So there you have some spooky books to read for Halloween. I would love to know if you've read any of these, if you have any recommendations for me. As always, I add on to this list every single year because I read new spooky books that I want to recommend to you, again, every single year. And if you're interested in hearing my favorite mystery thrillers that I think are perfect to read for this time of year, come back next week because they will be right here on this channel. That sounded so much like an advertisement. I'm sorry. Just come back next week. Maybe there'll be a thriller video. Check it out. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.